Welcome to the Growing in Love for Life podcast, where it's all about saving and strengthening your marriage and creating the relationship you really deserve and want to have. And now, from growinginloveforlife.com, relationship and marriage coach and best-selling author, your host, Liam Naden.
This is episode 26 of the Growing in Love for Life podcast. Hi everyone, Liam Naden here again. Pleasure to be with you for this episode of the podcast. And I've got some really interesting and I hope helpful information to share with you today on a very interesting topic that will really give you some more tools to help you to save your marriage if that's what you're struggling with. But just before we start, I just want to say a real thank you to all the people who've been emailing me with comments about these podcasts. It's really great to know that people are getting such great value out of them, and I really love to hear from you, really, hear your stories, hear your thoughts, your feedback, what you find helpful, and maybe even some suggestions for what I could do in the future. So if you do want to drop me an email, I'd be delighted to hear from you, as I said, and my email is simply liamnaden@gmail.com, or you can contact me through my website, liamnaden.com. Anyway, also a number of you have also gone on to purchase one or both of my programs, and I'm really thrilled because I know what a big difference these make. I mean, really, these podcasts, what I'm trying to do is give you as much as I can, but I can't give you in the short time that we have together all of the complete systems and processes and really the step-by-step plan, if you like, to show you how you can really quickly and easily, with the least pain possible, hopefully, really get your marriage back on track and turn it into something great. So if you haven't already, please have a look at those programs. Have a look at my website, liamnaden.com. I've got two programs. One is a 7-day program called Stop Your Divorce: How to Save Your Marriage When Your Spouse Doesn't Want to. And as the name suggests, that's what it's about. It's about when you really want to save your marriage, but you've got a husband or a wife who wants to end it. Perhaps they're involved with someone else, or they've just lost their way, or they say they don't love you anymore. And so that's for you. That's to show you how to really bring them back on track and do the right things and stop doing the wrong things. And my other program is a larger one. It's a 30-day program. It's called Save Your Marriage, and it's a relationship transformation program, and that really deals with much bigger issues than just how to save your marriage when your spouse doesn't want to. It's how to rebuild all the communication, the intimacy, how to remove all the hurts from your relationship. And you can work on that with your spouse, or that's also something that you can do on your own as well. So both of those programs are available from my website, liamnaden.com. And I also have a free report which you might like to look at called The 5 Keys to Saving Your Marriage Now, which is at my other website, growinginloveforlife.com. You can get that there. But most of the information I have is at my main website, liamnaden.com. Alright, so what we're going to be talking about today is something that is extremely common amongst people who are struggling to save their marriage. And in fact, of the many people who approach me for help, and I do get a lot of approach obviously, I'd say this particular thing is something that virtually everybody has. And it's also one thing that if you can get over it, it's going to give you a much, much greater chance of actually saving your marriage and resolving all the problems in your relationship. And this is particularly true if you want to save your marriage, but your spouse doesn't want to.